So I'm going to see myself in a second. All right, we're going to have a second before we appear.
All right.
Hey, it's Open Tech Will Save Us number 10, and that's the last time I'm going to be able to do that. So I want to present to you today Matthew Miller, who says Matthew Miller, distinguished engineer at Red Hat and the current Fedora project leader. He's going to tell us about the state of Linux on the desktop and a few other things there as well, I think. And then we have from the Subsocial project, which is it's something a little bit new to me. It's part of the Polkadot blockchain or ecosystem. We have Alex Siman, or Alex, he likes to say Alex Simon, and he's going to tell us about that. We'll also, a little bit later on, we're going to hear from, it's going to be from Matthew Hodgson from the Matrix team, and he's going to give us a run through of, the great success, which was the Matrix running of FOSDEM this year that happened at the weekend. We're all kind of reeling and at the same time, just overall pretty excited about how it went. So I'm going to say, take it away. Oh, here we go. Speaking of the devil, I was about to say, take it away, Matthew, but then you appeared and I was worried that you'd think it was you. But no, we're going to say... You're so shell-shocked from the day already. All right, Matthew Miller, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about Red Hat?
Awesome. Yeah. So I am Matthew Miller. I am the Fedora project leader, which is something I've done since 2014, which is kind of amazing at this point. So Red Hat is obviously a gigantic company at this point. I'm big, maybe not gigantic. IBM is gigantic. Red Hat is owned by IBM, as you may know, but actually operates independently and is a medium-large company. And Red Hat makes lots of money selling enterprise products, including Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And they also sponsor the Fedora project, which is the upstream open source community project from which RHEL is derived. And so my job is basically to coordinate all of that. And it's a sort of servant leader sort of position. I don't get to tell anybody what to do. I try to make sure that the community's needs and wants are understood and the community is functioning well. And as a Red Hatter, that Red Hat is working well with the project and getting the things they need to justify their sponsorship. So I probably people know a lot about Fedora at this point if you're listening to me. If you don't, I can talk more about what Fedora specifically is. But it's it's a project to make a Linux distribution, including a desktop distribution, but also things like Fedora CoreOS for container cluster things and Fedora IoT to run on devices. So a whole diversity of things, and there are hundreds of people who work on it every week and thousands of people every year. A lot of them, a significant portion paid by Red Hat, but a majority who are actually community volunteers or work for other companies and are just interested in Fedora as an overall project. I brought my Red Hat here to show off. It is a Fedora, of course. That's the Red Hat employee hat. But also, I recently got a promotion to distinguished engineer, and so some of my Fedora friends bought me this very distinguished top hat, which I cannot wear with the headphones, but you can imagine me looking super distinguished with that. So I don't have slides. My plan here, it kind of have a short time. My plan here is to talk about myself a little bit, talk about Linux on the desktop, and talk about some of the licensing things that are going on in the kind of open source free software world right now and how that impacts things and how it all ties together. So to start, about me, how I got to this place and this kind of weird, unique job, which I love. I've always been interested in computers, but my family did not grow up with I didn't have a lot of money growing up, so we didn't have a computer at home in elementary school at all. And so, but in third and fourth grade, my public school had computers, Apple II computers, outside of the classroom in the hallway, and you could, if you were done with your work or something, go and play with them. And there was a Teach Yourself AppleSoft Basic stack of books that was next to them. So I did that, and I actually got up really early before school, an hour early, and walked to school, and the janitor let me in, and I would like hack on those things, which is kind of amazing to me because as I've grown up, I think I've gotten more lazy, and I can't imagine myself getting up an hour early to walk a mile to do something these days. But as a child, it was very exciting to me, and so I kind of got self-taught that way. By the time I got to high school, I worked at a local public library, saved up some money, bought myself a PC, and started learning more advanced things. I had some great tutors who kind of a friend at my parents' church told me let me use his computer and said, "There's nothing you can do that will break this in a way that I can't fix," which really helped me learn about computers because I did break it and we fixed it together, and that was awesome. Got my own computer, and eventually I wanted to learn something better than BASIC, and I wanted to learn C programming. But at the time, compilers were things that were, a significant fraction of the cost of the computer. And so it was kind of frustrating to not be able to buy a C compiler. And another, I'm going to talk about church a little bit. This isn't a religious talk, but it's kind of a community thing. So another person at my parents' church actually gave me a stack of floppy disks with a thing called DJGPP on it, which was a DOS port of the GNU compiler collection, totally free and under the GNU public license. And so I was able to teach myself a little bit of C programming using this completely free compiler. And that kind of blew my mind, that this idea that something so complicated and very, very powerful, actually more powerful than the compilers you could buy for, in the hundreds of dollar range, was just free, and that people were sharing and giving this out of, it wasn't even like, in those days there was a lot of shareware where you can use this, but if you're really using it, you need to send us $10, and it would stop working, or it would just nag you all the time till you felt guilty. There was none of that. This was just a whole community of sharing, which was kind of mind-blowing to me, but also awesome. And this is also where I'm going to talk about the church thing a little bit more. So I grew up in a Mennonite hippie commune community, which was awesome. I'm not going to go too much details about Mennonites, but it is an Anabaptist sect, and a lot of the early Anabaptists had the idea of going back to the roots of the church as described in the Gospels, where everybody gave up individual positions and lived together communally. And so my parents were hippies, and at college, they kind of got this idea and got some of their friends together. And so they started a church which had the same ideals, and they lived in with a common treasury, and it, shared everything, and shared houses and cars, and it was a pretty awesome place to grow up. And it sounds like I might be describing a cult, but there's a key difference between this and a cult. A cult has a charismatic leader who tells you what to do, but in this community, decisions were made by a consensus process. People worked to agree on what they wanted to do, and kind of build in trust in each other and a shared goal to build a project where a thing where you're working together to have a functioning community of people with shared interests. So from this, a lot of the stuff in the free software movement actually shares a lot of these kind of utopian goals about how community should work. So when I got involved in free software, a lot of the governance things were pretty interesting to me, because I was, a lot of projects like Fedora work by consensus, and this is a thing where when it's not your job, you're not forced to do this. When you're a volunteer, a lot of, if there's a vote and you don't agree with that vote, there's nothing binding you to it other than a lot of interest in it. And so if you kind of have a rule by a leader, or if you have a majority rule situation, it actually doesn't work as well as this idea of everybody works together to agree. And even when you disagree on something, you have a decision-making process which is about the thing that's greater than the whole, rather than about making short-term individual decisions. So in that case, for example, if we want something, even making a technical decision, when you disagree with it in a consensus process, it's okay to disagree. But the idea is when you disagree, your views are listened to and respected, and you feel like, okay, I can go along with this even if I disagree because I'm part of this project as a whole. So I grew up in a community that had that kind of ethos, and I was excited, as I got into the open source and free software world, to be part of a community that has that same kind of feeling about things and the same kind of, we're building this thing that works together. So yeah, I thought this was a tech talk. Now you're talking about religion and cults and decision making. It all kind of ties together, and there is definitely a political social thing that is part of free software that is important to me and part of why it is valuable. When the free software movement started, in the 80s, a lot of it was based on this idea that it was questionable that copyright could even be applied to software, that this is something that people should share, and this idea that you can say this code now just belongs to me and no one else can benefit from it felt wrong to a lot of those early hackers. And so copyleft, like the GNU public license, is basically a hack that says, okay, here's the pragmatic reality of the law. It isn't what we want, but we can hack this to make it so we have this thing of sharing that's enforced by the law. Very clever. And then as that developed, we later got into open source, and more in the later 80s, the 90s, and we had kind of a more pragmatic, this is a good way to build software. It's not just a way to build community. But we still had Microsoft calling open source cancer and communism and so on. And you know communism aside, there really still is something to it, that the important thing about free software and open source is this social structure. And it's great that it makes good software. It happens to make good software, but there's something that is inherently valuable about the social process by which it is made that I don't want to get lost. All right, so I'm going to jump a little bit. To talk about Linux on the desktop. I've been running Linux as my desktop system for 20 years now, and with basically no Windows or Mac or anything for at least 15 of that. And sometimes it is hard. It's sometimes like we just switched to Pipewire for audio in Fedora, and I was having problems where my surround sound was weirdly rotated by 90 degrees. Like the front speaker was coming up the left, but the other, like strange stuff, right? And it can be kind of hard to install. A lot of other operating systems, you just buy a computer with it, and it just is there. You don't have to think about it. With Linux and the desktop, you generally we fortunately have some options now, like Lenovo shipping with Fedora pre-installed. Awesome. But in a lot of cases, you have to go through some hoops to get there. And the UI, like the interface, it's kind of weird. It's not what you're used to, maybe. Things are a little bit different. Things are quirky. It might be opinionated in ways you don't like. You kind of have to fight against it sometimes. And I hear Mac users saying, why should I run Linux on my desktop? I want, I have an experience where everything just works. I want everything to just work, and that Mac can provide that. They've got an entire stack from the hardware all the way up that they can make a really nice integrated experience. So on the one hand, I want to argue, actually, it's not that bad. A lot of stuff, if you install Fedora, it's going to just work. It's pretty slick. We put a lot of work into it, and the community has built this thing that is actually really great, and I think technically better in a lot of ways. But and also with that, on Windows or on Mac, you actually run into things that are quirky and frustrating and don't work all the time as well, because the thing is, computers actually suck and software is all terrible. It's not just that's not limited to an open source world. Really, everything is kind of hard. But it is true there's a sort of polish that these commercial systems can have. And one of the things I hear around that a lot is Linux is only free if your time is valueless. And so the point I want to make here is the kind of free that we are talking about with Linux on the desktop is actually worth your time, because this is something that we've built, this community project, that actually belongs to us. It doesn't belong to, Fedora doesn't belong to Red Hat. The trademark does, but the project certainly does not. This is something where when you are involved, when you are somebody who you uh, participate in a forum, a mailing list, just tell your friends about it. Like, you are part of Fedora, you are part of Linux, and it is something that actually belongs to you. You are the part of the community that actually owns it. And if you like Apple, you can be an Apple fan. You can be, you can be a really enthusiast, a fanboy. You can be, you could work for Apple, but ultimately, it doesn't really belong to you. It's not your thing. It's always somebody else's thing that you're just kind of allowed to participate in. And with Linux on the desktop, you have an operating system that is actually yours in a really powerful way. And your opinion on it matters, and your use of it matters in a way that it never will when you are just the customer of a proprietary system. So that's my main argument for why you should run Linux on the desktop. I think it is better, but the important thing is that it is yours. It is ours. So that is really just amazing. And that kind of thing enables you to do things with the operating system that you can't, that other people don't care about. So, for example, Fedora has some concerns about privacy, but we are not super privacy focused. But there's a project called Cubes, which is incredibly privacy focused and segregates different parts of the operating system into different VMs to keep it separate from each other. And that's all built on Fedora, and that's awesome. Because we enable those extra things to happen. Things people care about can be done in a way that, even if that's not our main market in Fedora, we enable all these other things to happen. So yeah, I'm getting to my time where I want to do questions. So the one thing I wanted to talk about also is there's kind of a movement recently with particularly some server software, but I think we're going to see it creeping in more and more to these idea of shared source licenses, which are, or non-compete clause licenses, where somebody who is a company that backs a particular piece of open source software is finding that they are not able to extract the amount of money they want to from that, and they see Amazon, for example, standing up that same service and making also money off of it, maybe even more than they are, and they feel frustrated. So they've created these licenses which basically allow you to get the source, but through either explicit things in the license or just the way the license is actually designed, it's not practical for anybody else but the person, the company that owns this license, to actually monetize it or benefit from it or really extend it in different ways. And the argument is, from these companies, I read a venture capitalist who was backing this, who said these things let academics or hobbyists or developers who want to use this, it lets them hack on it, and they can use the project as a component of something that they want to build. And so this is true to the spirit of open source. And that's the part I really want to push back on. These licenses are fine in an abstract sense. I don't care. Like, I don't care about proprietary software. Lightroom is great. It can exist. We've got Darktable, for photography, that also exists. It's fine, but Lightroom doesn't pretend to be open source software. And this thing of these licenses let you hack is entirely missing the point of what open source and free software is about, and this thing that is super valuable, that this belongs to us, and that it is our thing that we can do what we want with, and it solves our problems, and we're sharing it with everybody else. So for this, it's not really about sharing, it's about extracting the value and letting you provide patches. It's a one-way flow of things, and it's just really not great, and not what open source and free software is about. And so I think we'll see some of that stuff reaching down even to the desktop. And my message about it is, really, it's fine, but don't let them co-opt this spirit of open source and community and the goodwill that gives in everybody around it, because it isn't part of it, and it's not part of us. There. There, I hit the 20-minute mark, which is what I wanted to leave 10 minutes for questions. So,
Hey, you're under no
there we go.
time pressure, so you
Yeah, I know.
you can talk.
No,
Might be the
but
first time
that's
anybody has
basically
had
all the things I
dilemma.
wanted to say. That just the thing, this is called open source will save us, and the thing about that is going to save us is this community and the community decision process and community ownership and feeling the spirit of we're in this thing together. I really want to make sure we keep speaking up for that and preserving that in everything we do.
Awesome, thank you, Matthew. And yeah, you name dropped some really cool projects there. I especially think I'm amazed by Darktable and how it's come along and is really, yeah, it's like, for what I need, it's absolutely a substitute for Lightroom. I think it's super cool. So I don't know if you joined the room. There's a bunch of questions here. We'll read them out anyway.
Yeah, read me the questions. I'll answer them. That'll be easier.
Let's hit you with a series of questions. So I'm going to go in order. Does your Mennonite commune, do they run Fedora? Do you pitch to them?
My dad, who is still very involved in this. All of these a lot of these communitarian things kind of broke up as the 80s hit. The 70s are great for idealists. The 80s were not so much. So that church still exists, but doesn't run as a commune anymore. But okay. That my dad actually does run Fedora and does actually use Fedora for some things related to that.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's totally their ethos, I guess. Oh, and I just wrote myself a note. I didn't realize that Cubes was linked to Fedora in that way. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, that's educational. So Prescas says, this is a statement disguised as a question as well, but what thoughts on Apple over the beginning of OS X when many free and open source devs moved over to it? This is a time when they actually had GPL software, but then they moved away from it to BSD. I remember a time when Apple dived in and took a whole bunch of mind share, when the first OS X came out and people were like, wow, a Unix with a more accessible front end. I don't know if you had any comments on that time period, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, I see some parallels to the shared source kind of thing, where it's taking the goodwill of this is an open source community project and then walking back from it. And we see the same thing, to be honest, with Android, where Android, was never really a community open source project, and they really didn't do much to invest in that. And every version of Android has more and more things tied to proprietary Google Play services and less to open source. So yeah, that's always going to happen. Big companies are going to big company. That's basically that is what it is. And the more we can bring people into, including big companies who are interested in these things, into being real open source citizens, it is possible. It's just it often is a lot of work, and that's one of the reasons Red Hat invests a lot of money and a lot of work and a lot of people time in doing this the right way in Red Hat and in Fedora, and we think it provides greater results, but it is also a lot of extra work, and it would be a lot of extra work for Google, for example, to do that with Android. That they've decided.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Apple and Google are in the same boat in that sense. The amount of work that Fedora and I speaking on behalf of Matrix, I know how much work it is to make sure that people are engaged and that they understand not just that this is a valuable piece of software for its own sake, for what it can provide, but for the ecosystem and the ethos that you get along with that, and that as a user you need to upfront, go along with that ethos.
Yeah, right before this, I was at an internal talk with some of the people working on Ceph, the file system thing, and they were. This is basically a blatant plug for how awesome Red Hat is here. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. But it was a great I've been thinking about these things, and this was an amazing contrast because the talk was all about Ceph is entirely open source, but it is a very large, millions of line, complicated code base, which is easy to break. and therefore their project contributions are usually either just the core team working on it, or from a few very large companies who are big enough to have their own very deeply knowledgeable teams, and then they don't have very much community involvement. So this is a whole initiative to add a Lua API to it, the Lua programming language, so that easier, lightweight things can be done, and to actually build up individual and smaller community involvement and contributions around that. So the entire project to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing and open up the project so that more people can be directly involved and be part of it is amazing.
Terrific. I mean, and that's such at odds with, I mean, just taking the kernel, for example, which, is totally inaccessible and really, really difficult for people to get on board with. And therefore has to have a whole culture around it to support that. So that's okay. That's a really interesting approach. All right, we've got so many questions. I'm going to start blitzing some. All right. So Silverblue ? I guess the question is it ready for use? How do you feel about the project? Yeah.
I love it. I think it's very interesting. It's still got a lot of quirks, and some software still doesn't work really very well with the separated model. I think it is a good direction because it's a general direction we're going with. A lot of things like our IoT edition is based on the same RPM OS tree technology, and Fedora CoreOS is as well. And so I think it kind of makes sense to have our main editions all using that same technology. I think we'll probably shift to that as our main focus eventually. I'm not sure how long that will be. We actually just had a discussion about that with the Silverblue team, and one of the things was Fedora Workstation has been working so well and so smoothly, and we haven't had a lot of updates that break things for a long time. So a lot of the Silverblue provides a model where updates are painless. We're already having painless updates, so the incentive is not there as much, which I guess is a good problem to be in. But I think that model of separating the basic OS from applications is a good one that will be useful for the future.
And this, I guess there's another question, which is, Carl from the KDE basically says, what about the Plasma version, which is called Kinoite?
Kinoite, yeah, it's a mineral. I had to look it up.
Right, okay.
Yeah, there's I think there's some progress on that as well, and that's going to become an official Fedora spin. I think with 34, maybe a 35. It's in progress. So
that's good.
Yeah. So KDE people, you're not left out.
Can you? I mean, this is something maybe as a project lead you don't want to get into, but why is GNOME often first in these cases?
Yeah. Oh no. So it's this is very simple. We have more resources around GNOME, and we wanted to provide users who don't know where they're starting with a simple, oh, I have this use case, this is what I should do choice, rather than an overwhelming array of 15 different options. Because we certainly do have 15 different options in Fedora, and that's awesome, but we wanted to make our default offerings basically be here's a good starting place if you don't know what you're starting with. And the fact is, with Red Hat's desktop team behind it, and just a lot more, a lot of the GNOME developers use Fedora. So we basically have a lot more resources to make a polished thing with.
It's all about those ties, isn't it?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the KDE is second class in any way. So all the KDE stuff in Fedora uses our primary resources. It's not like Kubuntu where it's an outside project. It is actually part of the main project. We just basically, and this is also one of the reasons that it's not called Fedora GNOME, it's called Fedora Workstation. We wanted to make it use case focused, and the technology is second. Whereas if you are a KDE enthusiast, we want to make it easy. Like the technology showcases are there as well, but Fedora Workstation isn't actually meant to be a GNOME showcase. It's meant to be a easy to use desktop environment for people.
It's like you're coming at it from 2 points of view. One from the tech point, and one from the you just want something that works. What brings to me to mind is Pop! OS, and they also chose GNOME sort of as their way in as their default. Sorry, talking about the competition.
Yeah,
anyway.
no, that's fine. Those are great people over there at System 76.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things we are looking at redesigning our Get Fedora website just for it's time to refresh it, and we do want to make it clear that these other options are available and make it so that people who are looking for KDE can find it quickly. And I know that's not the case on the current website as well as it could be.
Got it. So Fedora hates KDE. Gotcha. Oh, so Gerard Ryan here says, "Oh, I've been using Silverblue for nearly 2 years," and he says it's great. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, cool.
So Bruno, our own Bruno from the Matrix, from the Element team, is he's probably one of the biggest Fedora fans that I talk to a lot.
Nice.
So I do go to him for his opinion about things related to that world. So he's a big fan. He says, from my perspective, okay, here we go. From my perspective, one of the larger migrations Fedora has undertaken in recent years on the desktop is X to Wayland. Fedora jumping quickly on this bandwagon is one of the reasons I use it, but there have been and still are some rough patches, e.g. around the clipboard and drag and drop. What is your perspective on this, and how far do you think we are from being 100% there?
I feel your frustration on the clipboard. Drives me crazy. Probably once or 2 times a week. Honestly, I do feel like this goes back to the little bit of there's some pain here, but it's worth it. Right. But it's also part of Fedora's place in the ecosystem of Linux distributions in general. Is that we want to make sure we have the new things, and we don't want to be bleeding edge, but still leading edge. It's kind of a balance we try to follow all the time. But it's often the case that Wayland needed to get in front of actual users to have these problems fixed, because you can only go so far and when it's in theory, and at a certain point it's got to get to actual users to find out where the real rough spots are and to get things fixed. And so that's why we made the decision to go to Wayland when we did, and I think it was roughly the good decision, and we had pretty good automatic fallback to X, and X is still there available for everybody if you need it. I think we made the right call there. I think we're making the right call with Pipewire coming up. I'm glad my audio is working. That's going through Pipewire here. It's an audio server replacing Pulse Audio.
Nice.
That's going to probably be in Fedora 34. We'll see if it's ready enough.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because part of what you said there was that you need to get people to use it in order to test it and confirm that it works. But you need it to work to not annoy. You just can't always rely on that. The early adopter graph. At some point, you just have to get people to use it. So okay, and Pulse Audio versus Pipewire is going to be the next thing. I guess.
Right. So it's always a balance. We try to juggle it very carefully.
Leading edge is a new term for what Fedora does. Oh, here we go. So, sorry, I'm having to read it and paraphrase. How do we, as an open source community, best overcome the fair criticism that some of the proprietary and full stack alternatives like macOS just works? Is this about involving more non-traditional tech users into testing? Is it about better documentation? What is your advice from what you're doing within the Fedora community?
Yeah, wow. Yes, it is definitely. But it also, they secretly put their answers in there too, right? No, it is definitely true that we need to focus on that. And a lot of the desktop team at Red Hat and Fedora contributors as well, outside of Red Hat, are very, very focused on that. It's one of the things we recently switched our default editor from VI to Nano based on feedback from some of our people who are kind of on the front lines of that.
Wait, it was VI rather than Vim anyway, or was it Vim?
Well, it was Vim. Yeah.
Okay.
Although it might have. Anyways, because how do I exit Vim is still a meme, right? And
it's the top question on Stack Overflow, I think.
Right. True? So we wanted to make sure that we have a nice, user-friendly, it just works environment for people, and we've been doing some things with. We have a project with Red Hat's interns. It's kind of an in-house group of people where we make sure that they get Fedora on their desktop and give us all of their complaints, so we get a fresh set of young new users.
It's the highest
with
quality feedback you can get. Is people who are technical and being made to do a thing.
Yeah. But I also really agree with the point that getting more non-traditional users and their feedback involved is important as well. One of the things that I don't know what your balance is at Element, but at Red Hat there's like 2,000 something engineers and 12,000 something non-engineers who are necessary to make the company function, and most open source projects work on the basis of 100 engineers and one non-engineer, which is not a very different ratio. And so I often hear things like, how can I get involved? I'm not a coder. It doesn't really seem like a thing for me. And the actual answer is you probably have skills that are much more valuable to us than yet another coder. Not that I'm dissuading more coders from getting involved, but like your skills are very valuable. Yeah, documentation is crucial. But design, testing, just testing from your own perspective on things. Art, publicity. Oh, art. Awesome. This is a place to put a plug for a really cool project we have in Fedora called the Fedora Zine, where we have our design team, like a magazine, underground magazine zine. We're putting together one of these with artwork and things from Fedora contributors.
Nice.
Something we're going to be handing out at conference booths once we can do conference booths again, kind of to showcase how the Fedora community is a wide, broad, diverse group of people with a lot of different interests and things.
That's awesome.
I don't know if I answered the question here, but
at some point there would have been a nugget that did. I mean, so that whole conversation has triggered a mini debacle in the chat as Pulse Audio and Jack versus Pipewire, Vim versus Nano, Nano versus everything, and then, well, you shouldn't be using the terminal as a newbie anyway. Discussions I heard for the umpteenth time. And Michelle says that they're entirely grateful for the Vim versus Nano distraction as it draws all the heat away from the other change proposals that you've got.
Yeah. Those definitely true. That one, we had some big changes like, Btrfs for the file system, and I forget what the other huge ones were, but that Vim versus Nano definitely got most of the mailing list traffic.
I mean, these are 30-year-old arguments. I'm astonished. All right. All right. So let's move on a little bit. So let's do a slightly softer one. Do you think it's important to convert other users to free software and introduce them to the community, or should it be good enough when we have our free things and the others have their proprietary things? So, what is the degree of evangelism? I guess is Lub's question.
Yeah. So, I would like to build the community of people who are participating in this utopian dream that we have. And so to that point of view, I think we should evangelize it. But I'm also going to go back to Mennonites here because this is Mennonites do not evangelize in the traditional way at all. The Mennonite form of evangelism is the Mennonite Disaster Service, which is if there is a hurricane and your house gets knocked down, volunteers will come and help you rebuild your house. And if you want to ask why we're coming for no reason to help rebuild your house, we can talk about, those kind of things. But the first thing is we're going to help you build your house, and that's the primary thing. And so I think in open source as well, I think the you should run Linux, it's better, or Windows sucks, or those kind of arguments aren't very convincing. And I think the best way to bring people over is to do good things, to make it shiny and exciting, and to talk about these virtues of community and the things that you get by being part of it, rather than aggressive door-to-door knocking kind of
That's
evangelism.
terrific. And I love, first of all, I love you bringing it back full circle, but I'm also really interested by how much this how much of a formative experience this was in terms of your thinking about evangelism within the sphere of technology. So that's really cool. The arguments are still going on in the chat, by the way. If there have been new questions in the last few minutes, I haven't seen.
Who's winning the arguments in the chat?
Proprietary software, because it's getting. No, they're off onto to Oracle licensing now. All right, so there's one more deeply Fedora question, which is: do you think there will ever be a Fedora tablet/mobile alongside Fedora workstation, server, etc.? There's a whole range at the moment, because I think people are pretty fired up about the Pine phone in particular and Linux phones in general. So I wonder if that's a space that Fedora want to get into.
So I know we have a group of people who are enthusiastic about that, and I definitely support what they're doing. It is a very hard space, especially the phones. Tablets are maybe a little closer to home, and maybe I'm hoping that some of our friends at Lenovo are going to help us with that in the future. This isn't anything. There's no secrets here. I just am actually hoping.
Oh.
So have you seen like their the Nano Fold that they have, like a seamless? Oh my, it's beautiful.
No, my wife's got a Yoga. Is that the same thing? It folds.
This one is screen on both sides. Like
no, I haven't seen that.
Folds to a tablet. Yeah, it's gorgeous. I'm hoping we can get some version of Fedora onto more of those things. Phones are really difficult, a lot because of the regulatory framework and just the competition and everything. It's an area where Microsoft decided to give up. So I don't know. It's a pretty hard just form factor for us to get into. I like the idea. And I definitely think, like Pine phone and things are cool, but it's also somewhere that I don't think we can put a lot of resources into, just because it's a lot of risk.
Cool. All right, Matthew, thank you very, very much. Did you have any final comments?
I guess we just branched Fedora 34 yesterday, so that development is happening. Beta should be coming out soon. Check it out. Help us test it. If you haven't installed Fedora before, excellent time to do it now. And also, thanks for having me on. It was fun.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for answering the questions in the as honest as you could, and dealing with the incoming. Thank you very much. All right, so who do we have? Thanks again. Who do we have? It is Alex. It's really Alex Siman, but he likes to be called Alex Simon. So we're gonna let him behave that way. And you're gonna present about Subsocial Network, which is an open protocol. I quote, an open protocol for social finance on a Polkadot and IPFS stack. Now, I must admit that my knowledge of Polkadot is very poor. I read a primer today, and I got a friend who's a fan to talk me through it and why it's different to Ethereum, and in his opinion, so much better. But I didn't understand all of it. So if you could talk us through that, maybe introduce yourself and talk about your project. Sure.
Thank you guys for inviting me to this wonderful series of events about open source. So from your intro, I understand that it makes sense to tell a little bit about Polkadot, why it's interesting, right? So
yes, please. Yeah. I feel like it's worth your time to just at least say what it is.
Sure. So I didn't prepare like Polkadot presentation. I prepared a presentation of Subsocial, but I can just speak about it. So Polkadot is a public blockchain. In the way, like with Ethereum, it's also public blockchain, and Bitcoin public blockchain. But the goal of Polkadot is, if to say in simple words, is to create an internet of blockchains. So it works in a way like relay, or you can think even maybe like BOS, like other blockchains can be connected to Polkadot relay chain. So it can look like a tree structure where on the root there is Polkadot relay chain. You can think of it like a centralized chain in a decentralized architecture. And other chains can be connected either via bridge, if this is an external chain, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Zcash, EOS, whatever. So they're external to the Polkadot ecosystem. So they can be connected via bridge. And another type of connection is more native. It's via another piece of software called Cumulus. And there is a technology called Substrate. So Substrate is a technology for building blockchains. So we can think of it like a blockchain framework from Parity, and Polkadot is built on top of Substrate. So yeah, and plus they're promoting this framework as a building block for your next blockchain. So you can build blockchain on Substrate and then be connected to Polkadot ecosystem via slot. And currently they're planning to have something around like 100 slots, but maybe it will be increased as the more technology will be mature and efficient. So another difference from other blockchains, especially it was very different like a couple of years ago, is that Polkadot is using WASM, and it means that it can execute either as a native code built for the target platform, so it's most efficient execution, and plus it could execute runtime logic. By runtime logic, it means the business logic of a blockchain. It's state processing functions, set of state processing functions that process every block and transactions inside. So you can, they're separating this consensus layer and peer-to-peer communication and gossiping from this runtime logic that processing transactions. And it means that you can compile your runtime logic as a WASM binary and upload in a special storage by special key in the storage of a blockchain database that is on RocksDB. And then at the next block, execution engine will check if there is a newer version of runtime, and it will execute this newer logic from the compiled WASM from the storage. So it means that it will be interpreted, and it will be a little bit slower, but still it means that blockchains built in Substrate can be upgradable like a normal, almost like a normal site. So you can have much better iteration for your project, for your startup. So you don't need to struggle from hard forks like with any other blockchain before Polkadot and WASM. And you can iterate, you can introduce improvements, fixes, so you can start to think more like in more traditional startup way of doing things. Yeah, it's amazing. And I didn't follow too much other blockchains, to be honest, because so much happening even inside of Polkadot. But I know that after Polkadot, there is another blockchain, Cosmos. Also, they're working on blockchain interoperability, aka Internet of Blockchains, and they also adopted this concept of upgradability via WASM. So I heard about that. Yeah, but Polkadot was first in this, and there are a couple of other interesting things happening in Polkadot, of course. So, for example, at Substrate, they also deliver a lot of different packages. If I'm not mistaken, it's something like more than 20, maybe 30 packages. I don't remember exactly. And they're called pellets. So, yeah. But you can think of it like a module. And there are such pellets like balances, identity, staking for validators, and a few interesting packages, modules you can think is on-chain governance. This is very interesting. So they have this concept called console, on-chain console. It could consist of something like 17 members. It's parameterized, so console can vote on another change to the number of seats in console. So this is very interesting. And people can vote for console by staking a native token of Polkadot chain. And then console can and should vote on proposals. So other people, other community members can create proposals, and these proposals could be of different nature. Some proposals could be just proposal to change some parameters, like number of allowed validators. Currently, it's something like almost 1,000 validators on Polkadot, or 700, something like that. And like number of seats on console, some parameters like for slashing, for some periods, and so on. And another type of proposals are spending proposals. So you can apply with a grant. So you can think of it like some sort of a grant where you can say that, okay, I'm planning to create this, I don't know, even like site that explains Polkadot. I want to develop a mobile wallet for Polkadot. I want to create some, I don't know, new module for Polkadot. And if the console approves this, so yeah, before that you should stake some amounts. It should be 5% of your requested amount. So your request, let's say 1,000 dots. It's a dot is a Polkadot native token. So you need to stake 50 dots, like 5% of 1,000 dots. And then if it's approved, then yeah, you can work on your proposal on implementation, and then you apply. And if they accept, so you get paid in dots. So also in Polkadot ecosystem, there is another chain called Kusama, and actually it was just a fork of software, not a chain state, but a software fork, and it's run was launched by the same company, Parity, so to develop in Polkadot and Kusama. So currently they're developing them like in parallel, and but this ecosystem started to evolve on the quite different ways. Kusama is more innovative, and they try to introduce some more interesting things. And Kusama and Polkadot are more conservative because they are risking much more funds. I mean, like 10 times more capitalization of Polkadot on today's market. Yeah, so this is much about Polkadot. I mean,
thank you for the intro. That did help a little. Yeah. So, but to be clear, then your project Subsocial is built on Substrate, which is a framework on Polkadot. So yeah, I guess now we're going to hear about Subsocial.
Yeah, exactly. But do you have any questions about the Polkadot story? So if I can explain.
We haven't had any incoming questions yet. Oh, people are saying they're happy.
Okay, great. So maybe I will just. I think I will show you a demo of our dApp. Okay, let me say a couple of words. So Subsocial is an open protocol for social networking with built-in finance. So what does it mean is that if you're familiar with some blockchain-based social networks or social media like Steam, like Pipet, like Voice from EOS, and some other, so they usually created like a social network. But in our case, our vision is that we're developing protocol that should allow to people to create virtual subnetworks within a protocol. So it's not just protocol from one network, but from multiple, like on the matrix, right? So there are a lot of different rooms, and room is the whole story of this exact community, and so on, and something like that in this way. So the vision is that people should be able to, yeah, just think about Reddit and Discord. So there are servers on Discord and subreddits on Reddit. And even good analogy could be Stack Exchange Empire, if you want to say it's empire. So there are more than 170 communities on Stack Exchange, something like that, 150 plus, it's for sure. And they are actually, sometimes they're running on subdomains, sometimes they have their own site, but they're running by the one corporation, Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange. And but they have quite interesting structure. So like they're built on the same engine, but they're customizable. They have a different look and feel, and they have some specifics to the sphere that they're covering, like either it's Linux or it's PHP or Java or math, etc. But imagine you can have the similar sort of a structure where.
Sorry, Alex. Do you have slides? Were you screen sharing?
Yeah.
Sorry, we've just realized that you're missing your slides.
One second. Let me share screen.
Sorry about that. Should have prompted you a few minutes ago. We even tested it in advance.
Yes. So do you see my screen?
Yes, we do. There we go.
Yeah. So let me just start with a slide that is problems that we're trying to solve with our solution. So I started to talk about something like monopoly on networks effect. So with social networks, the biggest problem as of today is networks effect, because it's not really a problem to launch social network, because open software, there is even WordPress, and you can use solutions like Circle.so, Tribe.so, and Ning, and so on, like a lot of different solutions. But the issue is that you don't, with SaaS system, you don't own the network effects. It's closed sourced. It's they're not happy to share it with you, and there exists such a term like to be deplatformed. So let's say you just invested a lot of energy and money and efforts into building your social graph on, like, I don't know, Twitter or YouTube and so on, and then you just do some wrong move. Even from their perspective, maybe it's illegal in your country, but from US perspective, it's illegal, and they shut you down immediately. Like that's it, end of story. And but with open source solutions that are built on a centralized architecture, like there is one database, and you just run this open source software. Yeah, so this story could be much more interesting. So you control the things. But you will struggle from lacking networks effects. So in our case, how we see it is that blockchain serves as a shared data layer, where if you run even multiple hundreds or thousands virtual subnetworks on top of it, all of them share the same layer of data because of blockchain. And for example, think of it like shared registry of identities, shared spaces that represents personal blogs or public groups, and anchoring of posts if you want to have censorship resistance, and so on. So with this, blockchain gives us shared networks effects, and plus, such as blockchain is by default, it's permissionless open system with open API. So it means that we can customize it in a way. Sometimes I compare it like even to Linux. So there is a core, and you can build whatever you want distribution for your needs and purposes. And plus, such as it's a substrate, so it is modular. So, for example, in our case, we already built something around 15 modules that includes spaces, posts, follows, likes, edit history, and ownership, and so on and so forth. And plus, this year we are working on monetization models like donations, recurring subscriptions, and then and so on. So another things that we're targeting as a problems is, of course, global censorship. What does it mean by global? Is that, I mean, censorship on a global level. Like, what is the difference between censorship and moderation? Is that with moderation you moderate your community on a platform, on a protocol, but with censorship it's like sort of moderation on a global level. So we're also following this approach similar to moderation, not censorship, and we have a model for moderation, so people can block content by its IPFS hash, or they can block content creators. In our case, it's represented by account ID, and so on. And plus, we also have roles and permissions, like we can have on Matrix, right? So we can create dynamic roles like editor or moderator, or I don't know, respected community member, and so forth. And plus, interesting problem to work on is I call it algorithm dictatorship. By this I mean that on Twitter, on Facebook, there is one algorithm on the platform, like one algorithm on Facebook, one algorithm on Twitter. And yeah, you can make some changes into the algorithm by your actions on the platform, what you like, what you dislike, what you share, how much time do you spend on each tweet or post. So it's also, yeah, it shapes the algorithm for you, but you cannot change it like dramatically. You cannot change completely. You cannot switch to other interpretation or implementations. And with blockchain, such as its open permissionless system, you can think of it as in combination with IPFS. You can think of them like a golden source of truth. And I can imagine having a decentralized marketplace for algorithms where people can go to web UI and by going to the settings, they can choose between different algorithm providers. For example, somebody can just build algorithms that is based on time, like in descending order, just sorted posts from the spaces you follow, or it could be a fully featured, very professional algorithm based on machine learning, and maybe this algorithm requires to track some information about you. So, but still, people will be able to choose between this, and then even developers of these algorithms can make money with this by, for example, renting out this algorithm like SaaS solution. Let's say users could pay like $1 or $5 per month, and have this algorithm that is totally customizable for their needs, and yeah, it doesn't have this advertisement and everything. So this is a problem that we're thinking about. And yeah, one more thing is the monetization, obviously, because this blockchain is relatively easy to introduce different monetizations. As I mentioned, we're thinking about tips, donations, recurring payments, like on Patreon, pay-per-view, like you want to buy access to some digital piece of content, and so on. Yeah. So what we already have. Let me switch to another slide. So this is a slide from another presentation. So far we have several corner entities in our system. It's spaces, it's posts, comments, votes, and also follows and personalized news feeds and feeds, personalized news feeds and notifications. So spaces in our case represent. It's quite similar to what is a room in Matrix. So it's just a representation of either personal blog, or startup, or project, or company, community. So it could be one person or many. And by utilizing it with roles and permissions, you can switch between personal space to public space. And then we also have several types of posts. Currently, we have 3 of them. It's a regular post. You can think of it like a Medium/Twitter. Then shared post that shares original post, obviously. and then comments. So everything is implemented via posts. If I'm not mistaken, in Matrix, it's like called message, I guess, right? And plus we have also votes, so we can upvote and vote content. And yeah, so we're thinking about introducing more different types of posts, like polls. So we can propose some poll with options like do you agree with this or that option for your community. And then some integration with NFTs, if you're familiar. It's a non-fungible token from blockchains that are representation of digital assets. And currently, it's a very popular topic in crypto. And currently, NFTs use it mostly for crypto art. So digital artists create their arts and then wrap it in NFT and sell it on other sites like Rarible and No Origin and Zora, etc. It's a very interesting movement, actually. We're going to also support this. So, as I said before, So Subsocial is built on Substrate version 2. It's an upgradable blockchain framework from Parity. We store content on IPFS. By content, I mean post titles, descriptions, comment body, name of a space, logo, images, etc. Even it could be videos. And plus we have integrated this extension, Polkadot extension. This is extension that allows you to sign transactions. So this is it looks like this. So it has a key and it handles the signing of transactions for you and then send it to Substrate node. So I would like to go through architecture a little bit. Yeah, it's here. So our architecture is here. So as I mentioned, it's Substrate as a basis, as a basement. And we developed like 15 plus modules for our protocol. It's written here: spaces, ownership, permissions, moderation, etc. And then the second required component for our protocol is IPFS. So as I said, we store the images, space contents, and posts. And then we can have optionally Postgres and Elasticsearch. I mean, we already have this. It's a part of our setup. But this parts are optional. So what I mean by this? So if you look at our web app, so actually it's DApp, decentralized application. So this is it, app.subsocial.network here. So you can see that by going to homepage, we see your personal newsfeed. So here you can see posts from the spaces you're following. So currently I follow space that is called Polka Warriors, and there are another spaces from Bill Laboon and so on. So you can comment straight from here. So you can write comment from your feed, like on Facebook or Twitter. We support Markdown, so you can make it bold. And then when you click comment, you will see pop up that requires you to sign a transaction, and it will take like from 1 to 6 seconds because our block time is 6 seconds. Okay, let's write some comment. I hope it will work. Nice.
Time for the live demo.
Yeah. Let's see if it works. We just updated the blockchain and DApp today, so I hope it works. Okay, it should take from 1 to 6 seconds. We are waiting for transaction. Okay, seems like it's fine. And okay, yeah, it's reloaded from blockchain. So we even use such approach. I'm not sure how it's called. I think it's something like optimistic representation. I don't know, optimistic save or something like that. So we use Redux for our web UI. And when you write a comment like this, for example, you click comment, and it already shows a comment over here. So it's like a person understands that where to expect your comment, how it's. And then if you click send transaction and it's successful, it will stay here. But if you cancel, it should it should disappear. But okay, I think we didn't implement. Yeah, it's disappeared. Okay, yeah, true. And plus, it's the similar approach with upvote. So if you click up downvote, let's say, it shows you already like -1 here. But if you cancel, it will be rolled back on UI. So it's rolled back. And of course, you can go and see details of this post by clicking on the title. Okay, so we see details here. And the same comments that we had. So I can show you how it looks in blockchain. So there is a website, it's a DApp as well, called polkadot.js.org. It's a portal for all substrate-based chains that have been connected. So you can see a lot of live networks over here. First ones, obviously, Polkadot and Kusama from Parity. And then a lot of projects from community, like Plasm, Darwinia, etc. And here you can see also Subsocial as well. And then there is even lots of test networks over here. Even more, like a lot. And plus, you can connect to your local node by switching to development. So right now, I'm on Subsocial, and we can see that we have already 2,600,000 blocks minted. You can go to Explorer. It's not fully featured, full Explorer, it's full history, but it shows lots of last blocks. So you can click through blocks and see if something is here. But such as blocks are produced every 6 seconds, and there could be no actions during that time, or transactions. So like a lot of blocks are empty. So yeah. So what you can do from here, you can go and check out the storage of blockchain that is built on top of RocksDB, and plus they have the created own version, ParityDB, that is much more performant. So for example, you can see the storage that is split by modules, as I mentioned before, like profiles, reactions, roles. Some of the models are our models. Some of our modules are shipped with substrate. So for example, spaces module is our module, roles, reactions, profiles, and posts. And let's say we can select post. We can see what is the next ID. So we can think of it like a serial ID in database, similar approach. Then you can get data by post ID. So let's say, I don't know, 5, 6, 7. You just click here. And then you can see who is the owner of that post, creator, who updated that post. And currently we support that only personal spaces. So people who created posts could edit it only. And you can see as well the extension of a post. As I mentioned, we have 3 extensions: regular post, shared post, and comment. And then the space ID this post belongs to, and IPFS CID. So by checking this IPFS CID, you can see the content of it. All right, and plus we have some statistics. It's actually not so very required to have this statistics in blockchain if the statistics is not used into the blockchain logic, but it just started with this approach because it was quite convenient. And plus, we have this interesting feature that you can get our web UI like this one. So, for example, you can go to our GitHub, that is /dapforce, decentralized dapforce, and you can, for example, fork our web app over here. And you can build it and put an IPFS, for example. And you don't even need a server. So the only server that this application needs, I mean, 2 pieces of software, it's a connection to Substrate and IPFS. So by having just connection to Substrate and IPFS, you can have a social network. But it will be a little bit different, a little bit limited, because, for example, in our case, we build notifications in Postgres because it's quite convenient. Blockchain doesn't support SQL type of queries, so we get these notifications from Postgres. You can scroll through it. It supports endless scroll. It also has aggregations. For example, let's see. Yeah, so sometimes it shows like Bruno and 3 other people upvoted your post, something like you can see on Facebook. And also another thing that we're building in off-chain. Off-chain is something that is not calculated on blockchain, but in Postgres, in Node.js applications, something like that. And the newsfeed that you can see on homepage is also calculated in off-chain. So when you go to homepage, you see this feed from your from Postgres. But by putting this on IPFS, you can just have latest posts and for example, even without Postgres and other services, but just with Substrate and IPFS, you can go to Spaces and see posts and comment and upvote and have the public communication. So this works. Yeah, so this is quite interesting type of architecture.
Yeah.
Okay. So we also featured this search engine optimization. Maybe so for centralized sites, it's not so big story. I mean, so what search engine optimized, so what? But with blockchains, it's quite important because sometimes dApps are quite dynamic. They don't have servers, but yeah, we're using in our case Node.js framework. So with it allows us to have server-side rendering with, via React, and then on UI we can have a dynamic re-rendering of pages without reloading the page. Plus, as I mentioned, we use Postgres for personalized newsfeed and notifications, and then we use Elasticsearch for full-text search content. Actually, we could use Postgres because since last versions, Postgres support full-text search, but yeah, in our case, we just had more experience with Elasticsearch, and it's actually much more powerful from what I know when it comes about full-text search. Also, we are supported by Web3 Foundation. It's a company that are responsible for promotion of Polkadot for educational materials and organizing conferences offline and online, and also they are supporting this grants program. So anyone who wants to develop something for Polkadot or Kusama ecosystem, you can apply for grants program from Web3 Foundation. The grants could be about like 30K USD equivalent, and so on.
That's very generous of the Web3 Foundation, Alex.
Yeah.
So we have one question here, which is just one thing for the end, I suppose, which is what is the benefit compared to something federated like ActivityPub? So I know that on the blockchain you've been able to implement social-like features, but what's the benefit of that?
Yeah, so I cannot say that I'm a big user of federated social networks. I just followed a little bit, and I read the articles and watched actually that event when founder of Mastodon was at your event. It was very interesting to listen. And I remember you asked him a question about IPFS or something, and he said that, yeah, so I don't think that we need this today. We are fine with what we have, and so on and so forth. So it's fine. So what is the benefits? As I said, I'm not an expert in this. I just read overviews, and all this ActivityPub looks quite interesting. But correct me if I'm wrong. With federation, okay, let's consider Gmail, because I'm much more bigger user of Gmail in terms of federated architectures. So people say that email services protocol, it's one of the oldest decentralized protocol and so on. But so if you're not happy with Gmail, you can switch to another one, like to Hotmail, to ProtonMail, whatever. Okay, it's right, but then imagine that if Gmail bans you and you didn't have a chance to tell other people what your next new email address. Of course, you can do it over other communication messages and protocols like Matrix, Telegram, Twitter, etc. But you will obviously lose some connections and let's say social graph, because a lot of things like registration on different sites and something else, if these systems like, let's say, Twitter, Facebook, if they don't support or smaller sites, if they don't support aliases or backup emails, and you get banned on Gmail. So have you heard the stories when you could not log in with your Facebook because you have been logged, because you have been banned? And it's the same like with email. So if Gmail bans you, you cannot sign into the service. And sometimes the startups don't even consider supporting email plus password old-fashioned way of registration, but they just rely on sending with Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook. And then once you bound on Gmail, that's it. You're done. You lose everything if you didn't connect additional Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So I expect that it's much of the case with other federation systems. So from my understanding, federation systems that follow the same protocol like ActivityPub, they can understand each other, and you sort of can trust that they say like, yeah, it's my account on that server, and you're saying that on server A, on server B, and C, this is your account, and you can link it because you verified Gmail on both of them. But what if other server align and they say that it's that same guy, it's Alice, it's Alice, but actually it's Bob that are pretending it's an Alice. And
okay, I think I see. Alex, thank you very much for the introduction to Subsocial and also the introduction to Polkadot as well. I think maybe more people knew about that, but it was very useful to me. Thank you for joining us today.
Sure, my pleasure.
All right, so there's the details, and people are going to check out Subsocial. What's that Discord link doing there? Come on, man. Decentralization.
Yeah, I know it's interesting situation involved. I mean, you can even check the Twitter. Like this is an even term like crypto Twitter, and it can be something like several 100,000 people over here. You should check out Bitcoin.com, Twitter. And all of them using Twitter, centralized stuff, and they're talking about decentralized. It's very interesting. I mean, in quotes, actually.
A lot of people on Slack too. All right, Alex, thank you for your time, and we're going to check out Subsocial. Sure. So we have something else coming up now. If you were available this weekend, then you might have joined the FOSDEM online experience, which was different, but it also had a bit of a flavor of the original. Lots of presentations, lots of people trying to do their best to present their content. And you probably would know then that Matrix was heavily involved in it. We hosted the main the chat and everything connected to that, and also created some software for moving people between rooms, making sure that the scheduling was done correctly. And anyway, you've heard all this. Here's Matthew, who's going to present how it went down and maybe share some war stories.
You've kind of done my whole talk now, Ben. What am I going to talk about? So joking aside, I guess, first of all, apologize that I haven't gone and put slides together for this. Instead, what I've been doing is putting together a blog post that will try to put all the details out in gory detail that people can refer back to in future, including a bit of a post-mortem of the bits which didn't go entirely according to plan. So basically what I was going to do now is to actually go back to the presentation I gave at FOSDEM about building massive virtual communities on Matrix. But there's a little section about how FOSDEM worked in the middle of it. It was meant to be a lot longer and had things like a deep dive into the dashboards that we were using, in theory, live at the time. Obviously, it's a bit late now, to see basically what was going on in our operations center and what the server on the Synapse side was actually built out of, what the JITSs and the Jibris are built onto, and also a quick tour over the various bits of new stuff that got built in order to support it. So I'm basically going to do that now. Let me start off by screen sharing everything, like so. And so you should have infinite Jitsi syndrome. And so this is kind of the extended director's cut of, so how does FOSDEM on Matrix work? So the diagram that kind of gives you the overall network here is that we've got a big Synapse hosted in Element Matrix services. We have a bot called FOSDEM, imaginatively, which is implemented using this new thing that Travis has built called Conference Bot, which I will attempt to talk a bit about, despite having not synced with Travis on it, because he's still recovering from FOSDEM, and also because he wrote it all, and I don't really know anything about it, but I'll pretend I do. And then we used extensive use of widgets inside Element, as folks will have seen, both for the HTTP live streaming stream of the main broadcast playout of the dev rooms going through the normal FOSDEM infrastructure, and then separately the backstage rooms, which were actually used to coordinate each individual talk. And we had like 700 of these. And they had a new special widget which would allow you to switch between using Jitsi Meet to actually chat with the host who was interviewing you for the live Q&A section of your talk, and then also the ability to watch a live stream. And in fact, this widget is then extensible for use anywhere, and we deployed chat.fosdem.org as a custom element web where the video call button was hooked up to provide this special combo live stream Jitsi thing that would allow you to watch a live stream with only a couple of seconds latency, or you could hit the join button to actually hop on the Jitsi, therefore letting Jitsi scale to hundreds, if not thousands, of concurrent watches without completely overloading poor little Jitsi, which caps out typically at about 50 users. In practice, we actually capped it, I think, to 25 to make sure that we didn't overload our Jitsi cluster. Now, the Jitsi cluster itself is running on UpCloud, I think, as a set of 5 or 6 nodes. And these are built out of the video bridge itself, which is the stream forwarding unit, which goes and bounces video streams between the participants in the room. And it's quite smart in that Jitsi uploads both the thumbnail and the high resolution version of your video. And the idea of the video bridge is that it chucks the thumbnail to the people who only need to see the thumbnail, and it chucks the high resolution one to the people who only are trying to view the high resolution one. So it kind of efficiently switches the right video to the right people. It then has JICOFO, the Jitsi Conference Focus, which is effectively an XMPP bot that sits on top of Prosody, the Lua XMPP server, which is the backbone for how Jitsi communicates and works. And so we've got a bit of an interesting one in that we have a little cluster of XMPP land sitting alongside Synapse here. And then for actually live streaming it, we had a whole bunch of Jibris. And Jibris are fascinating in that they are basically a headless Chromium sitting inside Headless X. So you're running an entire desktop windowing environment, which goes and captures the output of the browser as it just dials into Jitsi as if it were a real browser. And it grabs the audio via ALSA, it grabs the video from the frame buffer in X, and it chucks it both into FFmpeg. And then we configured it to fling it to Nginx using RTMP, which would then fling it over to FOSDEM2, as well as having the ability to tap directly onto our local Nginx in order to always be able to get a local copy of the video for the Jitsis which were going on, rather than relying on the one that was being broadcast off FOSDEM. Let me mute my notifications. So that is the kind of high-level network diagram. I apologize that it's a repeat of what we've already seen. But what I was trying to do back in the conference on Sunday, if I'd remembered, was to go and show this off. And 1 second. Sorry. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So what I should have done in the conference was to then Alt-Tab over to Grafana and show you what this all looks like. So let's do that now. So here is our main dashboard in Grafana for the Synapse cluster, showing the 2 days of the conference for fosdem.ems.host, which is the real name of fosdem.org server. And this is running inside Kubernetes, inside our Central European deployment, which I think is in Frankfurt. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And this is showing the main process, what we used to call the Synapse master, what we nowadays call the Synapse main process. And you can see a couple of interesting things here. First of all, something went horribly wrong there, which we'll talk about in a minute, down at 9 o'clock on Saturday GMT, all the times here are in GMT. And then a more healthy shape of the main process over the course of Sunday, although interestingly with a bit of a square tooth here. And then this graph shows us the send time latency. in terms of how rapidly messages are being sent through the system. And if we start scrubbing down, we can see the CPU distribution of servlets, and we can see that there's this big scary block of orange here where something was chewing 20% CPU on the main process throughout Sunday. This turned out to actually be, and if I hover over it, you might be able to see that it's the login and registration servlets. In fact, it was mainly the register servlet, because there was a buggy client that was hammering repeatedly as fast as possible on the register servlet. We let it alone in the end, as it wasn't really hurting anything. What else can I show you here? Lots and lots of stats for different CPU usages. We keep a track of the send time. We look at the memory usage, which for the main process was capping out at just over 2 gigabytes, which isn't too bad given the number of users on the platform. But more interestingly, if we go and look at our other workers here, we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different classes of worker process flying around here. So sort of going through a message as it goes through the Synapse server. Let's flip back to this diagram quickly. We basically have clients who are going to send a message, which is going to go through to an event creator, which then needs to be persisted into the database. And then, as people might know, the message sending path doesn't actually go via the Synapse main process anymore at all. So the main process does all of the other miscellaneous things and coordination, but for a hot path of, say, somebody sending a message and it going out to another client, it's going to come in here, create, persist, down to the database. This will wake up Redis, which will go and ping, say, a sync worker, and the synchrotrons, as we call them, the sync workers, will then go and let that message be received by a client, or possibly it might go out over the Federation senders. So if we quickly go back to the Grafana, and we switch through to the event creator, then you can see that the CPU on the event creator, despite the amount of messages flying around the place, was always pretty good, around 10, 20% CPU. And if I scroll down, there's probably going to be a graph here showing the number of events per second, which were being sent locally on the server. And it's not too bad. It's like a couple of hertz, 2 messages a second. There's a spike at this point, which was actually the bot going a bit wild due to a typo, which meant that it spammed or tried to spam every room there was. But otherwise, it's not that busy in terms of the local traffic that was happening there. If we look at the event persister, it's a bit more interesting. Where are my event persisters? There they are. Had some more spikes during the badness that happened on Saturday morning, which I'll talk about in a minute. Otherwise, CPU not too bad at like 12%. And then going all the way around the houses, you had the event, the synchrotrons, which are there. Now, synchrotrons are a bit more interesting in that they actually ran quite hot over the weekend. And you can see that they're all hovering around 95, 96, 97%. It's an interesting quirk of the synchrotrons that it's okay for them to essentially fall behind. So while superficially it might look bad, in practice it was holding up absolutely fine. And you can also see that we had 11 of them running during the weekend. So quite a lot of activity going on here. All of them are running in Kubernetes, shifted over various different hosts behind the scenes. What else can I show you? A lot of the others aren't so interesting. So we had the Federation Reader, which handles requests from the Federation in general. We've got inbound Federation traffic, so people sending us stuff. Not very exciting. Us actually sending stuff proactively out was a bit more busy. Frankly, we could have done with more than one of those, but in practice, no, it was all right in the end. So if we go back to the main process, we obviously had some badness going on here. And you can see that starting around 8 o'clock local GMT on the Saturday, the CPU started to shoot up alarmingly on the master or the main process. It got up to 100%. And then we actually lost metrics from the worker from the process because it was sufficiently overloaded that it was unable to talk home to Grafana via Prometheus to tell us what was going on. And what was going on, having gone and looked at its logs and profiled it a bit, is that we'd missed some of the endpoints which should have been farmed off onto other processes. Specifically, the client reader, which sits here, I think we were already running 4 of them. And in fact, before things kicked off, we actually started off on 1. And then at about very early on in things, we said, okay, let's have another 4 of them, or another 3 of them running. So we were running 4 of them. And this is a fairly general purpose worker. And I think the root cause of this is, stupidly, I broke it all at... I think it was about midnight on Friday night, by going and provisioning a community for Plus FOSDEM on FOSDEM.org, which had all 1,000 rooms in it for the entire conference, because a lot of people kept asking, where is the official Matrix community for FOSDEM? So I went and created it, and I think it's fair to say that not many people have created 1,000 room communities before, and as many people know, communities and groups in Matrix are not our strongest point, and that's why we're replacing them with spaces. But in terms of scalability and actually testing them at scale and checking that the implementations are well set up, etc., first of all, we had forgotten to move the endpoint off the main process onto client reader, but also I suspect that a whole bunch of people suddenly trying to join this community was causing more problems than we might hope. We'd also gone and provisioned a lot of other communities for identifying FOSDEM staff and other people around the place. So this is what was causing that explosion of CPU usage on the master. And it took us a while to go and get that under control. The good news is that the server was generally working in this time, because as we saw, the message sending doesn't actually go through the main process. So other auxiliary things were more impacted by it. And the most serious thing that happened was that the bot, which we'll talk about in a minute, was unable to restart, or it wasn't able to keep up with the server activity. Now, the bot, if you're interested in it, sits over on GitHub here on matrix.org/conference-bot. It's written almost entirely by Travis, very kindly, and is the conductor of your orchestra or your conference. It's written in Node using, I assume, let's double check, but I'm assuming that it's using Travis's bot framework. Where is it? Yep, Matrix Bot SDK. There it is, as a dependency. And it basically was the orchestration system for the entire conference. And if you look into the commands which it has things like the run command. And if you look at the run command, it's like a whole 8 lines of code, and it has a command like run all, and that sets your entire conference going. And then there's a scheduler which has various operations that basically executes various operations based on whatever the time of day is. And it could be scheduling, changing widgets in rooms. It could be sending notifications that talks are about to begin. And it also has a whole bunch of other convenience things like inviting people into rooms, inviting yourself into rooms, plumbing rooms into IRC, going and obviously stopping the conference, messing around with widgets. And we had it sitting in a control room where both us on the Matrix side and the FOSDEM organizers were frantically, constantly hitting it, inviting speakers to the conference via third-party invites via the invite command button and that sort of thing. So bad news in general if the bot, which is running the entire conference, is unable to keep up with the reality of the conference because the server isn't letting it log on. And in retrospect, something that we should have done is to decouple it probably a bit more from the server, so that, for instance, it didn't have to synchronize itself on startup, so that it could start up even if the server was having difficulties. So this did impact Q&A sessions because the bot was unable to switch the widgets around correctly for people to participate for the first couple of hours of the conference, but for which we apologize. Obviously, we then got it under control subsequently, and it was largely all right. What else can I say about Synapse? That's probably about it for now. Meanwhile, on the video side, this is the dashboard that we had for the health of the Jitsis and the Jibris. So the Jibris, you may recall, are what streamed the video to the live stream. Jitsi is the actual conferencing thing. And at the moment, weirdly enough, there are 0 Jitsi conferences running on it. This is, I think, a zoomed view of Saturday. So you can see there's a glitch when people were unable to get into the Jitsis due to the bot being down. But we've got this nice little heat map showing us the number of participants on each server, and stats on the amount of network traffic flying around, amount of CPU. And you can see that on the Jitsi cluster, our CPU never went above 25%. So that was working relatively well. And we were averaging about 20 conferences per server. And if I go and zoom in actually to the hotspot of the day, or no, let me zoom out. Oh yeah, so here the number is actually giving us the right-hand side of this box. We were capping out at about 48 concurrent Jitsis going on, which makes sense because it was roughly 50 talks happening at any given point. And then on the Jibris, really fun and interesting in that we had a dynamic scaling group, automatic scaling group in Amazon of VMs for the Jibris. So we were running a separate VM for every live stream that needed to happen, and we would keep a bunch of them idle, ready to go when needed. So 23 at this point were idle and 47 were busy. And if demand had increased beyond a given threshold, then Amazon would have magically spun up a bunch more VMs, and they would have been tied in order to live stream the various different Jitsis. For them, the reason we were running one per conference is that, as you can see, the average CPU for these things is about 50% in order to just run that Chromium and do all of the necessary funky WebRTC in order to render out the video and the voice for the conferences. Lots of network activity flying around, 25 megabits a second in and out, but that would have been CDN'd by CloudFront on Amazon for the HLS live streaming by the time it actually got to you. And then we had more stats of the number of live streams going on, how many were being created, how many were being deleted, and other sort of health checks on how the live streams were working. And in general, this side of things worked incredibly well. Huge kudos to Michael on our side, who did a lot of the ops infrastructure to build this thing out. The only problem that we had was on the second day, the Kiwi stand somehow managed to end up broadcasting to 2 RTMP streams at the same time, and this was enough to cause some fairly serious problems on the cluster as a whole. So that was fun. Then we had stats. So I'm sure people are interested in the gory graphs of how many people use this. And looking at the total number of users, so this is both guests and real registered users, we basically got up to 25,000 users by the end of the conference, and there have been a few more who have trickled in over the last couple of days to see what the fuss was about. You can see this beautiful shark fin shape as gradually it ramped up over Friday, and then loads of people on Saturday, and then slightly less active users on Sunday, and then it dialed away again, and is basically down to where it was before. So in terms of on a daily basis, we were seeing about 11,000 users on each day, and about 25,000 folks using the local server. But interestingly, there was an awful lot of people using it remotely from the wider Matrix network, and we'll give the stats on that in a minute. About 60,000 messages locally being sent per day, and you can see how that again is tapered off in the same shape. And in terms of the split of how many were full registrations versus lurking guests, it was about 20% actual registrations and about 80% guests. Final dashboard here is just the overall health that we had, showing the number of video streams, how healthy Synapse was, using AppDex as a metric, where 1 is good and 0 is catastrophic. And then most recent message send times from KDE and Mozilla and Matrix.org as pretty much arbitrary servers to use as a reference point. How much CPU, how much time are we spending GCing, how much disk space do we have, and that sort of thing. Obviously, it's all green and fine now, and it was for most of the weekend. So as a final thing, I wanted to not go there, but where is it? I had some fun per room stats. So it's not the full per room stats. And I've completely lost it now. No, it's not that. Oh yeah, here it is. Cool. So, in terms of the number of joined and left users, and so ranking the rooms by their busyness, here's the top 50 rooms on the server. And this is literally just showing the number of people who are currently joined as of like right now, or an hour ago, or whenever I generated this, the number of people who had left it, and then of the people currently in the room, how many of them are local to fosdem.org. And the stats kind of interesting that we're seeing like 800 odd people in total participating in the busier rooms like the MISC track, FOSDEM itself, the Lightning Talks, community track, etc. And really interesting that a significant number of these were not on the fosdem.org server. So of the 600 people and the MISC track, 339 of them, so over 50% of them, were participating from the, sorry, it's the other way around. It's like just under 50% of them, like 45% of them, were participating from the wider Matrix network. And it varies a bit. If you look at, say, the Go room, they had 329 people joined, of which 248 are local. So I think that's like 80% of the room were local, because presumably the Go community don't use Matrix that much. But then on the Mozilla stand, of the 230 people actually actively there, 120 of them are coming in locally. So again, 50-50 split between local people who are probably signing up for the first time on the FOSDEM server versus people already out there on Matrix. So really interesting to see the level of sort of federation and decentralization that was going on there. Another metric that we have is the number of guests in the rooms. So this is done by looking at the number of initial syncs, which is the old crappy peeking API that you use when you peek into a room. There's almost certainly some overlap with the people who then actually did join the room and signed up for an account. So there's a bit of double counting going on here. But it's interesting to see that over the life of the MISC room, there was like 2,300 or 2,200 people going and lurking on it. And then FOSDEM is actually more than that. It's split into two aliases because reasons. Lightning Talks at about 1,000 people, and so on and so forth. So that sort of gives you an idea of the scale of the things. I think of the 10,000 people over the course of the day, a bunch of them probably didn't make it in as far as peeking into a room itself. But also there's probably a lot of non-overlap between these. If you were to sum all of the numbers here, it comes to 30,000 different peaks that happened. And obviously a lot of those will be the same person just peeking between different rooms. But yeah, it sort of gives an idea of the distribution. So this is basically the verbal version of the blog post, which I'm putting together that we can put up with all the gory details for everybody who wants to know how to do this in future. I think that's probably it from a screen share perspective. Didn't actually tell me I was sharing my screen. I was sharing my screen, right?
You were. I would have yelled very loud. Yeah, I think people are super interested. There are a few questions. I don't know if you were following.
No, I was busy screen sharing. You could say.
So I mean, so some of these questions could have been answered in the chat, but it's probably better you do it on the video. Each of these workers, are they on literal separate servers, separate hardware? What's the deal?
Well, the magic of Kubernetes is honestly, I've no idea. I'm looking at it from the Grafana dashboard as to where the containers live. There is a whole bunch of EC2 hosts sitting underneath with however much RAM. And I probably should check with the ops team to see whether this, well, it wasn't a dedicated cluster because we were just using the normal Frankfurt EMS hosting environment. And so what you do is to say, hello, Kubernetes, I want to have a pod with however many gigs of RAM available, and please put it on a hardware somewhere, and it magically balances around the place to the extent that you just don't really know where the hardware is unless something's gone horribly wrong and you really need to debug it.
So on that subject, then, talking of things going wrong, what are the planned changes that resulted from this implementation and deployment? or is there no lessons? It's just that there were deployment issues.
The big lesson learned from it is the group's endpoint on the master shouldn't have been on the master, and it was basically a configuration failure that had never caused problems on EMS before, because nobody had ever tried to create huge numbers of groups and circulate them like we did here. So it was an unfortunate configuration screw up, which obviously got fixed in real time then, and is never going to bite us, at least in that failure mode again.
Because Spaces will solve this problem anyway.
Well, Spaces will also solve the problem, but we're not going to kill off the group's API immediately. We need to migrate people over. They might be on clients which don't talk Spaces yet and all that sort of thing. So I suspect they will hang around for quite a while, in fact, in Synapse for compatibility. So we don't want people to have disasters in the meanwhile.
So people are asking for general documentation about large-scale deployments. I'd love some best practice docs, like how many workers of what type for different configurations, and an example config for reverse proxy. So I guess I mean, we need to provide some docs on this. There is actually a pretty thorough workers.
Yeah, the workers doc used to be pretty minimal, because it was basically our notes of what needs to go where, and over time it's got better and better. I don't think it's got a reverse proxy config on it, mainly because everybody has different choices. Like we use HA proxy in some places, or Nginx, or you might be using the Amazon thing, ELB. But agreed, it could be better. And one of the action points we took out of our internal postmortem on the whole thing, which we did a couple of hours ago, was that we should improve the worker documentation, because ironically some of the problems, in fact probably the problem that caused the group endpoint not to be on the right worker, was because the documentation wasn't good enough for us, just as much as the wider community.
And there's so much internal knowledge, I guess. And then another technical point is, was there a CDN for streaming video?
Yep, so we were using CloudFront as the CDN for the HLS on our side. FOSDEM have a different CDN. I'm not actually sure what it is, because the FOSDEM side is hosted on Hetzner, and they have some kind of HTTP CDN in front of it to avoid killing all of their web servers with the HLS chunks.
Why one of the workers was pegged on 100%? Why isn't that a problem?
For the synchrotrons, they weren't actually pegged. If you looked at the number, it was like 93%. So I think on one hand we were constantly getting worryingly high to being pegged, but it's just the way it works. Basically, it's the nature of the synchrotrons is that they sit there waiting for something to happen, and then they wake up and chuck an awful lot of data down to the clients, and the scheduling overhead of how rapidly they recover and wait for the next thing to be handed out means that they can end up being quite busy without latency actually stacking up. There's a horribly bad explanation, but basically there's a lot of flex, it seems, in terms of how the twisted reactor operates inside it, and the whether it's doing useful work or not useful work, there's some flexibility.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a benefit of twisted or an inefficiency.
It's probably an inefficiency, in that in practice it has headroom, but it's too busy spinning the reactor waiting for something to do next, and it would be better if it just didn't do that and it just woke up when needed.
I think I know the answer to this one. Was FOSDEM 2021 the biggest live event in Matrix history?
Whoa, relative to Open Tech Will Save Us, which I think is our sort of previous live event metric.
Well, it was Hope, I suppose.
Which one?
It was Hope.
Oh yeah, of course, Hope. So yeah, Hope was some 1,500 users, which is quite a different profile because, for instance, Hope was paid. It was like $200 or $300 or something to get involved for the 10-day event, which was worth it, by the way. I paid and attended as a guest, and it was big, but obviously 1,500 rather than 30,000 folks involved. So as far as we know, this is easily the biggest online event in Matrix history. I think it might be the biggest online dev conference too. I think it might even be bigger than Black Hat and DevCon were when they went virtual last year. using Discord. Poor things. Apparently, it was terrible.
We should confirm that and then promote around it. Looking at the graphs of FOSDEM we had, how are they compared to the big matrix.org instance, looking at the peaks and so on? So I guess this is a question about the nature of the graphs. It's obviously going to be quite different because it's an event as opposed to an ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, when it was up and running during the day for the 2 days, the shape of the traffic is similar, but the scale is much, much smaller. So on matrix.org, we do typically 40 messages a second, whereas this was doing, 3 or 2 or something. So matrix.org is about 10x bigger. I think we're running about 28 synchrotrons on matrix.org right now, and many, many event creators, persisters, and all the other classes of workers, lots of Federation readers and senders. And critically, matrix.org runs on bare metal. It runs out of a data center in London, and is it's actually 4 very big boxes, each with 64 cores, each with, I think, half a terabyte of RAM, and each, at least on the database side, I think they've got 10 terabytes of SSD RAID. So it's throwing hardware at the problem in order to just keep it running, and we pay for it out of the Matrix Foundation donations via Patreon.
Nice. So, sorry, I'm going through questions and picking my favorites. What if AWS wasn't available? What would be the next choice of hardware?
We don't have any particular affinity to AWS at all. In fact, this is the first time I think we've ever done anything particularly AWS specific with it, with the automatic scaling groups. I'm sure that other people have their preferred cloud vendor. The FOSDEM guys really like Hetzner, and that seems to work well. We use UpCloud a lot for our kind of non-Amazon-y things. So that's where the Jitsis we're running.
What about matrix.org?
Matrix.org is hosted by Mythic Beasts, who are an amazing company based out of Cambridge. And we came to them and said, hey, we need a really big computer really urgently for Matrix.org, and they made it happen. And did all the nightmare stuff about getting the right SSDs and putting in 10 gig Ethernet and all sorts of other fun stuff too for us. So yeah, I mean, obviously people run big matrix clusters on Azure and all sorts as well.
So we got a question. This is actually coming into a product question now. Some people might associate Jitsi as a part of Matrix instead of an external product and widget of its own. This stands in stark contrast to the VoIP implementation in Matrix. What's the product thinking around that? Because we've worked to make sure that Jitsi integrates really nicely, and it mostly does. Do we need to differentiate it more?
Well, obviously, in an ideal world, the VoIP would all be native to Matrix, and that's why we do the one-to-one VoIP in Matrix, and it means that it's end-to-end encrypted using OM, and you get all your verification nicely magically work. It doesn't have any additional dependencies other than needing to have a turn server somewhere, but you always need a turn server if you want reliable VoIP. So the only reason that we don't use it for conferencing is that we haven't built a conferencing solution on top of Matrix yet. And it's kind of irritating and ironic because before Matrix, we built conferencing solutions and VoIP stacks. And in fact, I still have the code sitting here on my laptop. I was playing with it the other day. It's called Conf Server. It's written in C++. And it's as it stands, it's a multi-part conferencing unit. It could also be used as a stream forwarding unit, though, if it was hooked up that way like Jitsi. So in an ideal world, yeah, we would be doing it all natively in Matrix, and perhaps that will happen someday. We actually did have it working for the 3D video conferencing back in the day. That was a full mesh of one-to-one calls, and it actually worked really well. And you got end-to-end encryption in it for the multi-way conferencing. I actually had a chat with Dave, who is doing a lot of the VoIP stuff earlier today, about whether we should concentrate more on native Matrix stuff. And the answer is almost certainly yes, but watch this space to see where it works. In the meanwhile, though, we like Jitsi. As you say, we have integrated it well, and it serves a purpose, and it obviously did well enough for FOSDEM. So I think it's okay to have it as a slightly weird hybrid thing. And the new user interface, in Element at least, tries to converge the two sufficiently that you basically, if you're a casual user, you wouldn't really know that the one-to-one and the Jitsi are different systems.
Yeah, it's actually a really nice integration now. So this is a pretty deep opsy question. How do you balance, how do you decide what size of box to use for the worker compared to just horizontally scaling by adding more workers? Is that too deep opsy?
No, of course it's not too deep opsy, you know me. But the answer isn't particularly satisfactory, though, in that we made a guess as to how much RAM, and RAM is the main limiting factor that a worker is going to need. And because all the workers are effectively single-threaded, obviously it's going to start running out of CPU at some level. So we could automatically scale these up and down if we really wanted to, but in practice it's better to make an educated guess and over-provision and hope that we don't have a disaster like we did with one very, very hot worker getting overloaded due to bad traffic. And honestly, I don't think that Synapse would work particularly nicely for automatic scaling, because depending on how you shard between the workers, adding and removing them dynamically is not that straightforward. So you can't, for instance, change dynamically add and remove event persisters or creators. And whatever, there are a couple of other limitations on it, like what's another class of... I think you can add synchrotrons without restarting, but there are a couple of other tweaks where you might need to do it differently.
Yeah, I definitely think that we need to do more scaling documentation, just because the workers are there. But yeah, we get these questions a lot. All right, that is all the main questions, I think, and we're nearly on the dot of 8 p.m.
Cool. I'm sorry for being a bit knackered and just talking through it. Hopefully it was of use to somebody and interest to somebody, and hopefully the blog post will be a bit more coherent. But thank you, everybody, for coming along to Open Tech Will Save Us. Thank you, Ben, for interviewing me.
Yeah, well, thank you to the crowd for sending the questions. And we should say thank you to Matthew Miller for discussing his thoughts on the state of Red Hat and the Mennonite community, and Alex Siman for presenting Subsocial and Polkadot and that whole world over there. So thanks, Open Tech Will Save Us. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.